The light in the operating theater was a hostile, blinding white, washing everything, including Dr. Hajun, in a sterile glare. He looked like an anatomical drawing of perfection. Tall, his face a sculpture of razor-sharp angles, his hands, worth millions in precise surgical skill, steady over a beating heart. He finished the bypass, his movements economical and flawless, then shed his gloves without a glance at the exhausted team. He was magnificent, remote, and utterly devoid of warmth. Ha-Jun wasn't just a surgeon. He was a phenomenon, wealthy beyond measure, handsome enough to stop traffic, and emotionally dead. A magnificent monster whose coldness was his armor. His legendary indifference toward women was cemented by a past betrayal he carried like a toxic plume. Women, especially those who sought to breach his walls, were liabilities. He was heading for the executive parking level, his mind already calculating complex financial reports, when the chaos found him. A small crowd had gathered near the main lobby entrance, murmuring hushed Korean. Ha-Jun hated inefficiency and noise. He was about to order security to disperse them when a new sound cut through the drone. A hard thud, followed by a gasp. He stopped. The woman lying on the pristine marble floor was an intrusion of color and vibrancy. She was black, with glossy hair and skin like polished teak against the pale floor. She was unconscious, but not frail. Her body was taut, radiating a strong, unfamiliar energy. She wore a simple, stylish dress, an undeniable splash of L.A., confidence in the staid Seoul hospital. The friend hovering over her, a young Korean man, was frantic. She just collapsed. Jane, Jane, can you hear me? Ha-Jun's entire world narrowed to the woman, Jane. His brain, the genius instrument of logic and medicine, fired off a dozen clinical assessments: hypotension, dehydration, stress. But another, more primal part of his mind ignited with something terrifyingly non-clinical. He strode forward, the crowd parting like water before a ship. He knelt, his movements instantly commanding, and checked her pulse at the neck. The skin beneath his fingers was warm, yielding, and alive. It wasn't pity. It wasn't concern. It was a violent, possessive awakening that felt like a bolt of fire searing through the Arctic wasteland of his chest. Danger. Her lips parted slightly on an unsteady breath. Her scent, a complex mix of unfamiliar perfume and something inherently, dangerously warm, hit him. He felt the terrifying, irresistible pull toward her, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He looked up, meeting the wide, pale eyes of his stepbrother, Dr. Dae-hyun, who had just emerged from the corridor. Dae-hyun's smile was slick, observing Ha-Jun's intensity with unsettling curiosity. "A foreigner," Dae-hyun murmured, his gaze running Jane up and down with an oiliness that made Ha-Jun's surgical grip tighten on Jane's wrist. "You seem unduly fascinated, Ha-Jun. Too much excitement for the great Dr. Ice." Ha-Jun did not release Jane. He rose, his eyes freezing Dae-hyun's smile in place. "She is a patient," Ha-Jun stated, his voice a low, lethal instrument, "and she is now my responsibility." It was a lie. He didn't just want responsibility for her condition. He wanted possession of the fever she had ignited in him. He recognized the danger in her warmth, in her vibrancy, in the fact that she had cracked his armor in a single, silent moment. And with a terrifying clarity that settled deep in his heart, Ha-Jun knew he could no longer choose indifference. He had to possess the source of his ruin. Jane awoke to the hushed, disorienting quiet of a private room. The air smelled of expensive sterilization and lilies. Disorientation quickly gave way to irritation. She recognized the scent of wealth and privilege, the kind of place where even the medical monitors looked artisanal. She tried to sit up, but a sharp, authoritative voice cut through the silence. Do not move. Your blood pressure is stable, but your vitals need monitoring. The man sitting in the leather chair near the window was the source of the voice, and Jane realized with a jolt, the most impossibly attractive human she had ever seen. He was impeccably dressed, even while sitting vigil. His eyes, dark, intelligent, and utterly cold, were fixed on her with an intensity that felt less like clinical observation and more like a detailed interrogation. Whoa, okay, where am I? Jane's voice was raspy. She pushed up on an elbow, her head protesting slightly. And who are you? I'm fine. Seriously, I just skipped lunch. You are in a recovery suite at the Ha-Jun Medical Center. I am Dr. Ha-Jun, he stated, his Korean accent precise and beautiful. He used his name as a title, not an introduction. He rose, his presence instantly dominating the room. You suffered an episode of near syncope due to severe dehydration and, I suspect, a level of exhaustion you were ignoring. He moved to the bedside, not invading her space, but surrounding it. You are not fine. You collapsed in my lobby. This is not a common occurrence for a healthy young woman. I ran your initial labs myself. Your blood work is clean, but my assessment of your condition is comprehensive. Jane felt a surge of annoyance that warred with a strange, compelling recognition. His energy was dark, magnetic, and completely overpowering. Thank you, Dr. Ha-Jun, but I don't need a comprehensive assessment. I need to go home. I was just escorting a friend. You will not be going anywhere. His eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle but significant hardening of his magnificent face. Until I am satisfied. You are an American citizen, Jane, from L.A., and you are apparently ignoring your physical needs. That is negligence. In my hospital, I do not tolerate negligence. Jane stared at him. His arrogance was breathtaking. He wasn't talking to her like a patient. He was talking to her like a possession that needed maintenance. Look, I appreciate the free suite, but I don't belong to you or your hospital, she retorted, injecting every bit of her Los Angeles sass into her tone. I'm here on vacation, not as a resident. I'll sign whatever discharge forms you need. Ha-Jun leaned down, his face now inches from hers. The light captured the severity of his expression, but close up, Jane could see the volatile, almost desperate intensity in his pupils. A flicker that contradicted his cold exterior. You do not understand. You have a systemic deficiency that demands my attention, he murmured, the medical jargon a thin veil over a deeper, non-clinical meaning. His large, warm hand, the one that had held her pulse, moved to the cool metal of the IV stand next to her. I am the only doctor qualified to treat it, and I am telling you, Jane, I have canceled my afternoon procedures. You will rest. You will be monitored. You will stay. His gaze dropped to her mouth for a fraction of a second, an intimate, almost violating look that made the temperature in the room spike. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken desire and rising defiance. He wasn't just attracted to her. He was already trying to cage her. Jane instinctively pulled the sheet up to her chest, trying to maintain her own space in the face of his overwhelming presence. You are incredibly rude, Dr. Ha-Jun. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile, but a shadow of dangerous amusement. Rude, perhaps, but effective. Now rest. I will return. He straightened and walked toward the door. Just as his hand reached the polished silver handle, the door opened, and Dae-hyun, Ha-Jun's smirking stepbrother, stepped into the room, a bouquet of exotic, pale flowers in his hand. Well, well, awake and fighting, are we? Dae-hyun's eyes slid from Jane to Ha-Jun, catching the raw tension between them. I came to check on the beautiful, mysterious fainting woman. Ha-Jun, you are still here? Didn't you have a private jet to catch? Surely the CEO of this place has better things to do than babysit a tourist. He offered the flowers to Jane, his smile disarmingly charming, yet somehow predatory. Ha-Jun's entire body went rigid. His eyes turned from cold to absolute zero, fixed not on Jane, but on Dae-hyun. The silence this time was truly menacing. "Get out, Dae-hyun," Ha-Jun commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet radiating lethal force. "She is under my care, and she is not accepting visitors." Dae-hyun merely chuckled, placing the flowers on the table beside Jane. "Such a possessive doctor. Don't worry, Jane. I'm far more interested in making you comfortable than in conducting a deep assessment. I'll see you later, perhaps for a proper dinner." He winked, his final provocative action a deliberate challenge thrown directly at his brother. Ha-Jun didn't wait for the door to close. He stalked forward, not toward Dae-hyun, but toward the flowers, his intent terrifyingly clear. Ha-Jun didn't speak. He simply snatched the vase of pale, exquisite flowers off the bedside table. His jaw was clenched, his perfect profile etched with cold fury. Without breaking eye contact with Jane, who watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, he walked straight to the polished trash receptacle across the room and dropped the entire arrangement, vase, water, and blooms, into the can with a sharp, echoing clatter. "I hate lilies," he stated, turning back to her. It was a flimsy excuse, a transparent mask for the intense rage that had flashed in his eyes over Dae-hyun's gesture. Jane raised an eyebrow, a small, defiant flicker of amusement in her gaze. "Well, that's certainly one way to handle a gift." "It was not a gift. It was a declaration of interest," Ha-Jun corrected, his voice dangerously low as he moved back to her side. "Dae-hyun's interest is predatory, and his declarations are unwelcome." He paused, his intense eyes pinning her. "My interest, however, is not a declaration. It is a state of fact." He picked up her medical chart, his fingers tracing the page, but his focus remained fixed entirely on her. "Did he touch you?" The question was so raw, so loaded with dark possessiveness, that Jane felt a blush rise on her cheeks. "No, he handed me flowers. He was charming, actually, more so than the doctor who just tried to murder a vase of expensive flowers." Ha-Jun dismissed her point with an indifferent sweep of his hand. "His charm is deceit. He desires to prove that I cannot have what I want. He sees you as a weapon against my control. Therefore, any interaction with him is a risk to your security, and by extension, to my peace." Jane leaned back against the pillows, her initial annoyance giving way to a strange, almost frightening exhilaration. This man was not just attractive, he was dangerous, emotionally unstable beneath his clinical veneer, and totally consumed. The air around them was thick with a tension that was becoming a magnetic intimacy forged in secrecy and escalating risk. "And what exactly do you want, doctor?" she challenged, her voice softer now, her eyes inviting him to drop the pretense. "A clean bill of health for your hospital? Or something else?" Ha-Jun's composure finally cracked. He tossed the chart onto the end of the bed, the paper scattering. He leaned over her, bracing his hands on the mattress on either side of her head. He was so close she could smell the clean, crisp scent of his cologne, mingling with a faint, intoxicating musk. "What I want," he murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly, intimate register that sent a shiver down her spine, "is to dismantle the barrier you insist on maintaining. I want to know why you feel like a sudden, desperate necessity. I want to know everything about the warmth you carry, the warmth that I have been systematically avoiding my entire adult life." He lowered his head slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips again, a flicker of raw hunger visible before he brought his focus back to her eyes. "I want to know why I'm pulled to you so strongly, why it feels like you're the one I have been waiting for. I want to possess the reason why my logic has failed. I want to know the price of my denial." His proximity was overwhelming. Jane could feel the heat radiating off his body. She instinctively reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest, right over the steady, powerful thud of his heart. The action was purely defensive, an attempt to create space, but the physical contact only amplified the charge between them. "The price might be too high, Hajun," she whispered, using his first name for the first time, testing the intimacy. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gripped the mattress tighter. "I have paid far higher prices for far less. Stay. Let me assess this fever you've given me." He straightened just enough to break the immediate suffocating closeness, but his intent remained clear. "You will be discharged when I say you are. Until then, you are under my protection. And if Dae-hyun attempts to contact you again, or anyone else tries to influence your opinion of me," he stated, his voice a chilling promise, "I will ensure they regret the attempt immediately." He looked down at her hand, which was still resting on his chest, and a shadow of a grim smile touched his lips. It was a gesture of shared, dangerous understanding. He knew she felt the pull, too. He backed away, the moment broken, yet the charge still humming between them. He picked up the discarded chart with a sigh that sounded like defeat, but his eyes held the triumph of a man who had finally found the one thing he didn't know he was starving for. Jane was discharged the next morning, under the explicit, hovering supervision of Hajun himself. He didn't just sign the papers. He arranged a chauffeured car for her and her friend, gave her a personalized, overly detailed diet plan, and personally transferred her friend enough funds to cover all inconveniences caused by the delay. A gesture that felt less generous and more like buying her silence. "You will rest for the remainder of the week. If you experience any deviation from baseline, you will call this number immediately." Ha-jun handed her a surprisingly simple card, only his name and a private 9-digit number. "This is not for emergencies. It is for my emergencies." She took the card, the paper warm from his grasp. "Got it, doctor. Don't worry. My baseline is usually unbothered." His expression tightened. "Ensure it stays that way." As the car pulled away, Jane felt a strange mixture of liberation and lingering heat. She knew the moment she stepped out of his hospital, he would be watching, and she knew she needed information. She didn't come to Seoul looking for love. She came for a vacation, for air, for distance, for a reset. But the pull she felt toward Harjun was something she couldn't ignore. It wasn't a cute crush. It was intense, unsettling. The kind of attraction that made her feel seen and exposed at the same time. And somehow, Ha-jun was her type. Strength without cruelty, silence with depth, power without emptiness. "I didn't come here searching for love," she admitted to herself, breath-catching, "but it found me anyway, and I'm done fighting what God is placing in front of me." Still, Jane wasn't naive. Attraction didn't erase mystery, and mystery didn't erase risk. If she was going to embrace this, she needed to know who he really was. It was crazy how the feeling was mutual, how his gaze lingered like he recognized her, how his presence tightened the air around them, as if they'd met before somewhere neither of them could name. Ha-jun was an intense, beautiful fortress, sealed, guarded, impossible to read. But Dae-hyun was the loose stone, the one she could pry out, just enough to glimpse what was hidden inside. 24 hours later, a discreet text message arrived on her phone. Unsaved number. "My brother is predictably controlling. I apologize for his behavior. Dinner tomorrow night? I can tell you everything about the systemic deficiency you are supposedly suffering from. Dae-hyun." Jane hesitated for only a minute. Accepting meant defying Ha-jun's direct, almost dictatorial command. But she needed to understand the scope of his coldness, the reason for his terrifying fixation, and the depth of the betrayal that scarred him. She needed to know what she was walking into. "Jane, where?" "And I pay for my own dinner." "Dae-hyun." A small, private club. Consider it an investment in your safety. I will send the details. Dress beautifully. Ha-jun was not in the operating room. He was in his private soundproof office, overseeing global real estate investments. Yet, he could not concentrate. Every 10 minutes, he accessed the simple tracking app he discreetly activated on Jane's phone, disguised as a wellness application. She was where she should be, at the luxury rental apartment. He justified the surveillance as ensuring she adhered to his medical orders. Falling in love at first sight was something he never thought would happen to him. But with Jane, it sure has. And it's terrifying how she makes him feel. When the notification flashed, however, his entire body went rigid. Jane is moving. The destination was the Black Iris Club, a notoriously exclusive, high-end private dining establishment favored by the city's most scandalous elite, and one that Dae-hyun practically owned. Ha-jun's mind, which minutes ago had been calculating global market trends, now calculated exactly 17 minutes until Jane would arrive. The ice in his veins turned molten. He knew this was no accident. Dae-hyun was making his move, turning Jane into a pawn, or worse, a prize. The thought of Dae-hyun's hands near her, Dae-hyun's smooth lies filling her head, sent a wave of dangerous homicidal jealousy through him, a feeling he had never experienced. He snatched his coat and his keys, moving with a predator's swiftness. He didn't text, didn't call. He wasn't going to warn her. He was going to claim her. Jane stepped out of the taxi and paused. The Black Iris was discreet, marked only by 2 imposing guards and a heavy velvet rope. She was wearing a sleek black dress, confident and composed, ready to gather information. Inside, the atmosphere was dark, plush, and overwhelmingly intimate. Dae-hyun met her immediately, his eyes appreciative, his smile wide and genuine, yet carrying a faint, unsettling flicker of triumph. "You came. Good. That shows excellent judgment." He took her elbow, the touch lingering just a moment too long. "My brother, Ha-jun, treats the world like his clinic. He diagnoses, controls, and dismisses. But you, Jane, are far too magnificent for his sterile assessment." He led her through the club toward a secluded booth. "He is scared of you, you know. He has a type, women who are soft, easily molded, and white. You are neither. And his last love, the perfect one who devastated him, was his greatest betrayal. He views all women of color as exotic, unpredictable trouble." Dae-hyun leaned in, his voice conspiratorial. "He's trying to control you because you scare the cold right out of him. And honestly, I want you to win." Jane looked at him, absorbing the cruel, casual racism. "You paint a very unflattering picture of your brother. What's your motive, Dae-hyun?" He sighed dramatically. "Honesty. I want him to be miserable, and I want you to be happy. With me. He doesn't deserve the kind of fire you carry." He reached across the table and captured her hand. "Forget the monster, Jane. Come with me." Just as his grip tightened, a shadow fell over the table. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. Ha-jun stood there, clad in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, his face a mask of terrifying, barely contained fury. He didn't look at Dae-hyun. His eyes were locked on Jane's hand, pinned beneath his brother's. He saw the betrayal of her disobedience and the audacity of Dae-hyun's claim. "Let go of her." The words were delivered in a slow, lethal cadence in Korean, yet Jane understood every syllable. Dae-hyun slowly withdrew his hand, a triumphant, challenging smirk fixed on his face. "Brother, what a surprise! Enjoying my guest's company." Ha-jun moved then, not with violence, but with terrifying, cold efficiency. He reached over the table, not touching Jane, but grabbing her arm just above the elbow. His grip was an absolute non-negotiable claim. We are leaving, Jane, he stated, his eyes burning into hers. You do not seek counsel from the enemy. You are coming with me. Now. He began pulling her from the booth, his possessive intent making her resistance impossible. Ha-Jun's grip on Jane's arm was steel, his possession absolute. He didn't wait for her to gather her bag or protest. He simply hauled her out of the luxurious booth. Dae-hyun rose, a look of infuriating pleasure spreading across his face. Now, brother, don't frighten the lady. She was enjoying herself. Ha-Jun didn't spare him a glance. Enjoyment, he stated, his voice tight with controlled violence, is not synonymous with safety. He continued walking Jane through the hushed club, the scattered patrons staring at the shocking display of the elite Dr. Ha-Jun, acting like a barbarian. When they burst out onto the sidewalk, the cold night air hit Jane, but it was nowhere near as cold as the fury radiating off Ha-Jun. He practically shoved her into the backseat of a waiting black sedan, presumably his own, having been summoned the moment she arrived. He slammed her door shut and then rounded the car, sliding into the driver's seat with swift, economical anger. He didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he simply gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, and stared straight ahead into the streetlights. Jane, breathing heavily, finally found her voice. You are insane. You can't just manhandle me out of a public place. What in God's name was that? He turned his head slowly, and the look he gave her was devastating. It was the look of a man who was terrified and furious in equal measure. You disobeyed me, he stated, his voice a low, gravelly snarl that was more menacing than a shout. I am not your subordinate. I am not your patient anymore. I decide who I have dinner with, and I decide who I question to understand why the coldest man in Seoul suddenly decides he has a fever because a woman fainted. Jane lashed out, mimicking his clinical terms. Ha-Jun's composure finally snapped. He reached across the center console, not to touch her, but to brace his hand against the window, boxing her in, his body angled toward her. You went to him because he offered you the poison of information. You walked directly into the serpent's lair. Do you think I am blind, Jane? Do you think I don't understand Dae-hyun's game? He was going to sully you with his filth, convince you that I am the villain, and then try to claim you as his trophy. He was telling me the truth, that you are possessive, controlling, and that you have a type, and that I am not it. He even said you were scared of me. Ha-Jun leaned closer, his proximity dangerously intimate. The air in the expensive car was thick with their shared heat, their argument a fierce, private storm. Of course I am scared of you, he confessed, the admission ripped from him with shocking brutality. I have spent the last 10 years building a wall so high that no one, especially no woman, could ever touch the core of me again. And you, in one moment of vulnerability, cracked it open with a single glance. You are the ruin I avoided, the fever I denied. He didn't touch her, but the intensity of his gaze felt like a physical violation, burning away her defenses. When I saw you sitting there, smiling at him, letting him touch your hand, all I could think about was the man I would become if I had to watch him take you. And I know that man is capable of something dangerous. I almost hit him in the hospital yesterday, Jane. Do you understand the extent of the disaster you are to my control? Jane could only stare, her own anger dissolving into a terrifying realization of the depth of his volatile passion. He wasn't just controlling, he was desperate, consumed by a love so immediate and possessive that it threatened his entire existence. I needed to know why you claim me so fiercely, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ha-Jun closed his eyes briefly, inhaling sharply, struggling for control. When he opened them, the chilling indifference was gone, replaced by a desperate magnetic plea. I crave you, and I claim you because you are the only one who has ever made me feel alive, Since the betrayal. But you cannot be near Dae-hyun. You cannot trust him. You are mine to protect. Do you understand? He lowered his hand from the window and reached out, his powerful surgical fingers gently tracing the soft skin of her jaw, his touch conveying the devastating tenderness and possessiveness of his confession. Tell me you understand, Jane. The silence that followed Ha-jun's raw confession was thick, suffocating them both. His fingers, still tracing the line of Jane's jaw, felt like a brand, a possessive, undeniable claim. He was no longer the clinical doctor or the magnificent monster. He was simply a desperate man staring at the source of his obsession. Jane, he breathed, the sound ragged. Tell me you didn't seek him out because you were trying to hurt me. I sought him out because I refused to be a passive object of your obsession, Jane admitted, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the terrifying magnitude of the connection she felt. If you wanted me to stay away, you should have given me a reason that wasn't just a command. Ha-jun closed the distance, his beautiful, controlled face just inches from hers. The confession had stripped away every last layer of his famed indifference. He was entirely focused on her, consumed. Here is the reason, he whispered, his eyes dark with the heat of his craving. It is the only truth I have left. Then he finally moved. He didn't ask. He didn't hesitate. He claimed. His lips pressed against hers, a swift, hard impact that was fiercely possessive and instantly consuming. It was not a tender kiss of discovery, but a release of the desperate tension that had been building between them since she collapsed on his hospital floor. The kiss was fire. It was volatile, demanding, and utterly overwhelming. He kissed her with the focus and intensity he usually reserved for high-stakes surgery. Precise, total, and utterly non-negotiable. Jane, though initially startled, found her own defiance melting instantly into a thrilling surrender. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pulling him closer, responding to the magnetic urgency that had been crackling beneath the surface of their arguments. She kissed him back with the passion he had just confessed to fearing, a vibrant, undeniable warmth that sought to burn away his cold past. The sophisticated car became their private, urgent world. His scent of expensive leather and masculine sharpness filled her senses, mingling with the heat of their breath. This was the price of his denial, an intimate exchange that promised both pleasure and ruin. He finally broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to look into her dazed, heavy-lidded eyes. His breath was ragged, his magnificent control utterly shattered. Every moment since I saw you, he confessed, his voice husky with desire, has been an exercise in self-torture. I needed this. I need you. You will not leave me, Jane, he murmured against her skin, the statement not a question, but a vow delivered in the aftermath of their shared intimacy. You will not listen to Dae-hyun or to anyone who tries to sell you lies about my history. This is my history now. You. Jane could only tilt her head back, accepting the fire, the intensity, and the immediate terrifying depth of his craving. She knew she had just crossed a boundary into a love that would be consuming, turbulent, and potentially devastating to them both. A faint vibration from Ha-jun's phone broke the spell. He ignored it at first, tracing the curve of Jane's shoulder. When the insistent buzzing continued, he finally pulled his phone from his pocket, his expression hardening immediately as he saw the contact name, Min Seo, his ex-lover, the one who had orchestrated the ultimate betrayal. And there, right below the caller ID, was an ominous text message. Dae-hyun. She arrived today, Ha-jun, the ex. She says she wants to apologize, and she's quite eager to meet your new distraction. Ha-jun's face transformed instantly from consuming passion back to cold, lethal calculation. The world, the danger, the betrayal, the manipulative games, had just crashed back into their private moment. He looked at Jane, the raw desire in his eyes suddenly tainted by the memory of pain and the threat of history repeating itself. "The time for secrecy is over," he stated, his voice tight. He started the engine, pulling the sedan away from the curb with a swift jerk that announced their departure to the world. "Dae-hyun has just activated his biggest weapon against us, and she will attempt to destroy everything we have started." The sleek black sedan tore through the Seoul streets, the silence inside broken only by the low growl of the engine and the frantic pace of Jane's heart. The electric, all-consuming heat of their kiss had evaporated, replaced by the chilling reality of a new enemy, Min Seo, the ghost of betrayal, weaponized by Dae-hyun. Ha-jun's entire demeanor had reverted to the cold, focused precision of a man preparing for combat. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the road, but Jane knew his mind was cycling through painful memories. "Min Seo," Jane began, keeping her voice steady, "Dae-hyun mentioned she was your ex. Why is her arrival an emergency?" Ha-jun didn't look at her. "She was more than an ex. She was my fiancé, and she orchestrated the ultimate financial and emotional betrayal that nearly ruined my family name and certainly ruined me." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which Jane recognized as the deepest possible pain. "She was the reason I decided all women, especially those seeking entry into my world, were self-serving liabilities. And Dae-hyun is using her to prove I'm the same." "Precisely," Ha-jun confirmed, pulling the car into the hidden garage beneath his high-rise penthouse. The doors hissed shut, locking them into a secure, private world that suddenly felt far less safe. "She knows all my vulnerabilities. She knows the rules of the family. She is polished, manipulative, and appears utterly harmless. She is the perfect opposite of you, Jane. Everything society expects me to choose." He cut the engine and finally turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a desperate new kind of intensity. "Dae-hyun is using her to force me to discard you, to prove I only made a rash temporary mistake. I want you to understand, Min Seo is not just a woman. She is a memory designed to destroy my trust." Jane's stomach twisted, not out of jealousy, but realization. She was fighting a decade of cynical armor, and now the perfect weapon was aimed directly at their volatile connection. "So what's the plan?" Jane asked, pushing down the surge of doubt. "Do we hide you until she leaves?" A shadow of a grim, possessive smile crossed his lips. "Never. We do not hide. We declare. She expects me to dismiss you quietly out of shame or fear. We will do the opposite." He reached across and took her hand, interlacing their fingers with the same fierce possessiveness he had shown in the club. "You will stay here, with me, publicly. She will see that I am no longer afraid of my past because my future is non-negotiable." The next morning, the confrontation began subtly. Jane was downstairs in Ha-jun's vast, sterile kitchen, trying to find a coffee machine that didn't require a PhD to operate, when the intercom buzzed. Ha-jun, who was already dressed in a tailored suit and sipping espresso, answered. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice crisp and cold. "Dr. Ha-jun, Miss Min Seo is in the lobby. She insists on speaking with you immediately." A muscle twitched in Ha-jun's jaw. He glanced at Jane, whose fingers tightened reflexively around her mug. "Send her up." "She will be here in 3 minutes," he informed Jane, his eyes boring into hers, testing her resolve. "Remember what I said. Non-negotiable. Do not yield an inch to her charm or her tears." Jane squared her shoulders, the warmth of the coffee mug a small comfort. "I'm from L.A., Ha-jun. I've dealt with Hollywood exes. I think I can handle a soul surgeon's ghost." 3 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and Min Seo stepped into the vast penthouse. She was breathtakingly beautiful in a way that screamed old money elegance. Perfectly coiffed hair, a designer suit that looked soft and expensive, and a delicate gold necklace. Her face was a study in practiced vulnerability, her eyes wide and soft. She looked like the right choice. She barely glanced at Hajun, walking straight to him with her hands clasped delicately. Hajun, I am so sorry. I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to see you. I have been consumed by guilt for what I did to your family. I just want to. She stopped abruptly. Her eyes finally fell on Jane, who was standing casually by the marble counter. Minseo didn't gasp or frown. Her expression simply froze into a mask of polite confusion, the perfect facade of innocence. Oh, Minseo said softly, her voice melodic. I apologize. I didn't realize you had company. She turned back to Hajun, her eyebrows raised in a questioning, slightly condescending way, silently asking him to introduce the help. Hajun's expression was lethal. He didn't introduce Jane. Instead, he took 2 steps toward Jane and placed his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, a gesture that was both publicly possessive and intimately protective. Jane, Hajun stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. This is Minseo. Minseo, this is Jane. She is not company. She is staying. Minseo's eyes widened fractionally. Her polished composure finally wavered, and the smallest flicker of contempt crossed her face as she looked Jane up and down, lingering pointedly on the difference in their skin tones and Jane's vibrant, uncontained energy. Staying? Minseo echoed, recovering quickly with a light, pitying laugh. Oh, Hajun, you always did have a dramatic flair. Well, it's lovely to meet you, Jane. I hope you aren't allergic to my Hajun's work schedule. It tends to be quite demanding. It was a smooth, effortless undermining, a reminder that she knew his real life, and Jane was an amateur. Hajun's hand tightened fiercely on Jane's hip. My schedule is my concern, Minseo. I believe you said you came to apologize. I have heard your apology. Now, you may leave. But Hajun, I was hoping to speak to you privately, about the future of the foundation, perhaps, and... Minseo lowered her voice, making it sound conspiratorial. I was hoping to warn you. You have a target on your back now. Dae-hyun is playing a very dangerous game. She made sure to look Jane straight in the eye as she delivered the warning, painting herself as the knowledgeable savior and Jane as the unwitting fool. Jane met the gaze, refusing to break. She placed her own hand over Ha-jun's arm, claiming her space and confirming her allegiance. Dr. Ha-jun doesn't need warnings about his stepbrother, Minseo, Jane stated calmly, her LA confidence providing the perfect counter to Minseo's elegance. He has me to handle the distractions. Minseo's polite contempt had been a chilling reminder of the game's stakes. As the elevator doors hissed shut on the ex-fiancé, Ha-jun turned to Jane, his eyes hard and calculating. She will not stop, he stated, walking toward the windows overlooking the city. Minseo knows that the fastest way to hurt me is to damage my reputation and the family's stability. Dae-hyun will ensure that the press, which is already salivating over my prolonged bachelorhood, is fed a narrative. The polished doctor is temporarily fascinated by an unsuitable foreigner. Jane stepped away from the counter, the fear replaced by a cold, steady resolve. Then we give them a different narrative. You said I am not a temporary mistake. Prove it. Ha-jun looked back at her, a slow, dangerous admiration lighting his eyes. My thought precisely. Dae-hyun expects me to hide you, to distance myself until Minseo is gone, to protect my assets. He expects me to choose control over craving. He walked over to a secure cabinet, pulling out a slim, gold-embossed invitation. Tonight is the annual Kim Foundation Gala. It is the most exclusive gathering of the Korean elite, complete with international media coverage. Minseo will be there, trying to corner me. Dae-hyun will be there, waiting for me to falter. Ha-jun reached out, his hand resting possessively on the curve of her waist. "We are going to give them a debut, Jane. I'm going to shock them. I'm going to make you the non-negotiable fact of my existence." The transformation was breathtaking. Jane emerged from the dressing room Hajun had provided, wearing a sapphire blue gown that Hajun had arranged, its cut unapologetically bold, its color vibrant against her skin. Hajun, magnificent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked at her and froze. The cold calculation melted away entirely, leaving behind the raw hunger from the car. "You look," he paused, his voice thick, "like the only woman who should ever stand beside me." The drive to the gala was tense, but charged with their silent, intense connection. Jane felt nervous but resolute. She was not just going to a party. She was walking into a battleground on Hajun's arm. When they arrived, the buzz of the media outside the venue was deafening. But as Hajun emerged from the sedan, his powerful arm wrapped around Jane's waist, the noise fractured. Flashbulbs exploded like a supernova. Hajun, who typically glared at cameras and refused to be photographed, stood tall, his head held high, his stance proclaiming absolute possession. He kept his hand firmly on Jane's back, guiding her into the grand ballroom. The entire room, full of Seoul's most influential conservative families, paused. Whispers and murmurs traveled like wildfire, all centered on the gorgeous, stone-cold Dr. Hajun and the stunning foreign woman of color he had brought as his debut date. They had barely taken 3 steps when they reached the receiving line. Minseo was there, perched on the arm of a powerful older board member, wearing a pale, elegant dress designed to convey demure sophistication. She had been smiling sweetly, but the smile vanished when she saw Jane. Dae-hyun, who was observing from a nearby pillar, had his triumphant, snide grin wiped clean from his face, replaced by pure, stunned rage. Hajun ignored the board member, stopping directly in front of Minseo. He didn't speak to her. He spoke about her, to Jane, loudly enough for the surrounding elite to hear. "You see her, Jane?" Hajun murmured, his voice a low, intimate rumble, only meant for her. "The ghost. She is here tonight to remind me of what I lost and what I was betrayed by. She represents my past shame." Then, Hajun did the unthinkable. He dipped his head and pressed a long, possessive, open-mouthed kiss on Jane's lips, right in the center of the crowded, scandalized room, in front of the most influential people in South Korea. The kiss was a declaration. "I claim this woman over my history, over your expectations, and over my own self-preservation." The collective shock of the Korean elite was palpable. Hajun broke the kiss, his eyes fiercely locked on Jane, who was breathless but standing firm. Minseo's elegant composure finally shattered. She took an involuntary step back, her face white with fury and shock. Dae-hyun, seeing his carefully laid plans dissolving into a scandalous public display, started to move toward them, his hands clenched into fists. Hajun finally looked at Minseo, his gaze cold and absolute. "Your shame, Minseo, has no currency here. Jane is the future, and she is non-negotiable." He then turned to Jane, ignoring the chaos they had created. "Dance with me!" As Hajun led Jane onto the floor, the whispers intensified, but the atmosphere had changed. Hajun had not just introduced a girlfriend, he had drawn a public, terrifying line in the sand, daring anyone, especially his brother and his ex, to cross it. The audacious kiss had done its work. As Hajun led Jane through the gaping guests, the music seemed to fade beneath the roaring tide of scandal they had unleashed. They danced, but their movements were less a waltz and more a declaration of war. Hajun held her close, his eyes constantly scanning the room, searching not for cameras, but for the predatory stare of his brother. Jane, still breathless, felt the immense power of his decision. You really just owned me in front of the entire nation's elite, she murmured against his ear. It was necessary, Ha-Jun replied, his voice low and dangerous. They need to understand that you are not a temporary lapse in judgment. You are the final judgment. He spotted Dae-hyun retreating from the main floor, his face a mask of thwarted malice. Dae-hyun wasn't storming off. He was calculating. He's planning something, Ha-Jun warned, tightening his grip on her. Stay close. Do not leave my sight. But the chaos they created provided the perfect cover. As Ha-Jun was briefly pulled aside by a powerful elderly chairman, Jane seized the moment to breathe, stepping toward a quiet, velvet-draped alcove near the main exit, desperate for a moment of silence. It was a trap. Dae-hyun was waiting. He materialized from the shadows, his face no longer charming or smug, but cold with venomous resentment. Congratulations on your spectacular debut, Jane, Dae-hyun sneered, his voice low and laced with malice. You've successfully secured the biggest prize in Seoul. Tell me, how much did that little fainting spell cost you? The plane ticket and the cheap clothes? Jane straightened, refusing to be intimidated. It cost nothing. I didn't plan this, Dae-hyun. I simply exist, and your brother chose me. That's what infuriates you, isn't it? That you can't buy or manipulate what he actually wants. His eyes flashed. He doesn't want you. He wants control. You're a colorful distraction to him, a dirty rebellion against the family, nothing more. And when I show him your true intentions, he'll toss you back to the gutter where you belong. He took a step closer, crowding her into the alcove. But Jane, I see the fire in you. I know exactly how to use it. Come with me. Leave the cold doctor. I can give you more than his stiff family will ever allow. I am not going anywhere with you. Dae-hyun's patience snapped. He grabbed her wrist, his grip painfully tight. You don't get to choose any more, little pawn. You just cost me a major deal with the foundation because of your little performance. You are coming with me now, and you are going to explain to my father exactly why you are not good enough for Ha-Jun. Jane struggled, the physical threat instantly raising her panic. Let go of me, Dae-hyun. Ha-Jun. The name was a magnet. Ha-Jun had already sensed the danger, his internal alarm screaming when Jane disappeared. He found the alcove, and the sight of his brother's hand clamped on Jane's wrist, his brother's body physically obstructing her, unleashed the primal protective beast that lived beneath his polished exterior. Ha-Jun didn't speak. He didn't issue a threat. He simply acted. He lunged forward, hitting Dae-hyun with a visceral force that sent the stepbrother staggering back into the velvet wall. Dae-hyun gasped, releasing Jane's wrist. Don't touch her, Ha-Jun growled, every syllable heavy with lethal intent. Dae-hyun, rubbing his shoulder, recovered quickly. She is in my family home, Ha-Jun. Who are you to threaten me over a cheap piece of... Ha-Jun cut him off. He reached inside his tuxedo jacket and produced a small silver handgun, an unregistered, illegal weapon he kept for security, a silent, shocking declaration of his disregard for the rules. He leveled the gun straight at Dae-hyun's head. The few remaining guests near the alcove froze, their hushed whispers dissolving into horrified silence. Jane stared, not at the gun, but at Ha-Jun's face. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, devoid of humanity. You lay one more finger on her, Ha-Jun stated, his voice a flat monotone, yet vibrating with controlled violence. And I swear on everything I ruined in my past, I will pull this trigger. She is not yours to touch. She is not a pawn. She is mine, and I will commit murder before I let you take her. Dae-hyun, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely terrified. He saw the cold, murderous intent in his brother's eyes and knew it wasn't a bluff. The sound of footsteps clattering on the marble floor preceded the panicked arrival of the family patriarch and the elderly chairman. They saw the scene, the powerful, beautiful Dr. Hajun holding a gun to his stepbrother's head, all over the beautiful foreign woman. The chairman gasped, his hand flying to his chest. "Ha-Jun, what in heaven's name are you doing?" Ha-Jun never dropped the gun. He simply broke eye contact with Dae-hyun and looked at his father, his eyes still burning with the possessive fire Jane had ignited. "I am showing him the price," Ha-Jun said, his voice deadly calm. "The price of touching what is mine. You will teach him, father, or I will, and the next lesson will not be a warning." He lowered the weapon slowly, never taking his eyes off Dae-hyun, then holstered it. He turned to Jane, his breathing still ragged, and gently placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her out of the scene. The entire family was in shock. The cold, logical doctor had just threatened to kill his own brother over this woman. The truth was out. Jane wasn't just a fling. She was the terrifying measure of his soul. Ha-Jun didn't wait for the ensuing hysteria. He steered Jane away from the stunned circle of guests and straight out of the ballroom. His hand remained a fiercely protective vice on her back, his body a shield against the horrified stares. He didn't speak a word until they were safely inside the black sedan, speeding away from the Kim Foundation gala. The car was silent, but the air vibrated with the aftermath of his violence. Jane watched his profile. He was gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were bloodless. The adrenaline-fueled rage was receding, leaving behind a cold, terrifying emptiness. "Say something, Jane," Ha-Jun commanded, his voice strained and quiet. "Yell at me. Tell me I'm a monster. You saw it. The thing I keep caged." Jane didn't yell. She reached out and slowly placed her hand over his on the wheel. The simple contact was potent, grounding him. "I saw the price," she whispered. "The price of my presence in your life. You almost killed your brother. For me." He slammed the heel of his hand against the steering wheel once, a sharp sound that echoed his self-loathing. "I wasn't acting. I meant it. In that moment, the thought of him touching you, claiming you, it extinguished everything rational in me. That is who you make me, Jane. I am ruthless, possessive, and capable of violence. I am not the calm, perfect doctor they worship." "I never thought you were," Jane said softly. "The perfect doctor doesn't melt a vase because his brother brought flowers. He treats it as a pollen allergy." Ha-Jun finally looked at her, his eyes dark, wounded, and searching. "Why are you still here? Why are you not running? I showed you my sin." "Because you did it for me," Jane admitted, letting her fingers trace the taut muscles in his arm. "You showed me that you will burn down your entire world before you let anyone take me. That level of possessiveness should scare me. And it does. But it also proves you are capable of the deepest devotion, the kind you swore you'd never feel again." They arrived back at the penthouse. The silence of the vast, luxurious space was a heavy blanket. Ha-Jun led her directly to a sprawling master suite, his movements efficient but charged with a need that went beyond the physical. "My family is currently gathered in a private meeting, deciding how to disinherit me," Ha-Jun stated, removing his jacket and tossing it aside. "Dae-hyun will tell them I am unstable, that you are a dangerous foreign influence, and that I need to be removed from the foundation and my assets protected." He walked over to the windows, looking down at the glittering city he ruled. "The next 48 hours will decide the rest of my life, and every decision I make will be based on keeping you here." Jane walked up behind him, placing her hands on his back, feeling the tension coiled in his powerful muscles. "I'm not leaving, but you have to tell me, was your first betrayal about money, or did she actually break your heart?" Ha-Jun turned, his expression pained. He reached out and cupped her face, his gaze incredibly intense. "Both. Minseo colluded with rivals to manipulate my foundation's stock, nearly ruining my father. But before that, I gave her everything: my trust, my hope, and the belief that I could be vulnerable. When she betrayed me, she didn't just take the money. She convinced me that intimacy was a fatal weakness, especially with women who don't fit the mold. He lowered his head, pressing his forehead against hers. You are the antithesis of everything she was. You are honest, vibrant, and uncontrolled. And that is why I cannot risk you. I will not let history repeat itself. Hajun kissed her again, this time with a mixture of raw tenderness and desperate possession. The kiss deepened quickly, fueled by the adrenaline, the danger, and the raw emotional honesty they had just shared. Their connection was fiery, desperate, and urgent. A confirmation that they were bound together by a risk too great to ignore. Every shared breath was a vow against the world that sought to divide them. Before dawn, Ha-jun's private phone, the one with the 9-digit number, rang. He answered, his voice instantly cold and professional. When he hung up, he walked down the hall and knocked on the guest room Jane was using. A moment later, the door opened. Jane stood in the doorway, barefoot, calm, still half wrapped in sleep like she hadn't decided whether to trust the morning yet. "Good morning," she said softly. Ha-jun's gaze held hers for a beat too long. Something shifted in his expression. Quiet, calculating, certain. A new plan was already forming behind his eyes. "I got a call from my father's legal counsel," Ha-jun said. "The family council is meeting at 9 a.m. Dae-hyun is pushing hard to have me legally isolated from the foundation, citing emotional instability and misconduct involving a foreigner." Ha-jun pulled Jane closer, his gaze burning with focused intent. "I showed them my capacity for destruction tonight. Now, I need to show them my capacity for commitment. They expect me to be shamed into silence. We are going to do the opposite." "What are we going to do?" Jane asked, her voice steady, ready for the next phase of the fight. "We are going to give them a choice that will invalidate every one of Dae-hyun's claims," Ha-jun stated, the idea hardening into a chilling certainty. "Jane, they think you are a temporary mistress, a fleeting distraction. There is only one way to make you permanent and undeniable." He looked into her eyes, the possessive fire burning brighter than ever. "I need you to marry me, now, today. We will walk into that family council meeting as husband and wife." Jane stared at Ha-jun, the dawn light filtering through the penthouse windows illuminating the dangerous sincerity in his eyes. This wasn't a proposal born of romance. It was a ruthless strategy, a declaration of permanent binding possession designed to dismantle his enemies. "Marry you?" Jane whispered, feeling the dizzying weight of the request. "Ha-jun, we've known each other for days. This isn't a wedding. It's a hostile takeover of your emotional life." "It is both," Ha-jun insisted, his fingers fiercely tracing the curve of her collarbone. "I am not offering you a courtship. I am offering you an absolute shield. Dae-hyun and my family can question a foreign mistress. They cannot legally challenge my wife. They cannot question the legitimacy of my foundation's future when I solidify my future with an immediate commitment." "And what do I get?" she challenged, her heart racing not just from fear, but from the intoxicating audacity of the plan. "A beautiful cage and a family who hates me?" "You get everything," he promised, his voice deepening with conviction. "My protection, my name, my fortune, and my undivided devotion. All of it permanent, all of it legally enforceable. And you get the chance to burn down the prejudice that nearly destroyed me. You get me, Jane. The whole terrifying, loyal mess. But we have less than 2 hours." He reached to his bedside table, opening a concealed drawer. Inside, resting on black velvet, was a platinum band. Simple, heavy, and undeniably ancient. It wasn't sparkling, it was a lineage. This is my mother's wedding band. It is not jewelry, it is a seal. Say yes, and the game is over. Say no, and Dae-hyun wins the first round. Jane looked from the ring to his eyes. She saw the possessive fire, the strategic brilliance, and the vulnerable hope hidden beneath the ruthless logic. This was the only way to meet his intense devotion, with an equally fierce, spontaneous act of faith. Yes, Jane breathed, the word a small, firm sound of total acceptance. Let's give them a shock they'll never recover from. 70 minutes later, Jane and Ha-jun stood in the opulent private registry office of the city hall, signing documents witnessed by Ha-jun's stunned and bewildered personal attorney, who had been woken and rushed there under threat of immediate unemployment. Jane signed her name, Jane Doe, from L.A., beside his powerful signature, Ha-jun. The commitment was instantaneous, binding, and shocking in its efficiency. At 9:05 a.m., the doors to the private family council room at the foundation headquarters flew open, and Ha-jun walked in, Jane on his arm. The room was suffocating with wealth, power, and suppressed fury. The patriarch sat at the head of the table, flanked by the legal counsel. Dae-hyun sat opposite, smirking, already detailing Ha-jun's unstable misconduct. Min-seo was seated discreetly in the back, observing like a vulture. The council members stared at Jane, then at Ha-jun's fierce grip on her. Dae-hyun started, rising to his feet, a triumphant, venomous look in his eye. "Father, I was just explaining that Ha-jun is clearly emotionally compromised and obsessed with this." "Silence, Dae-hyun," Ha-jun commanded, cutting him off with the authority of an emperor. He guided Jane to the center of the room, facing the table. His hand moved from her back to her left hand, which he lifted slightly, prominently displaying the heavy platinum band. Ha-jun's voice was cold, ringing with absolute finality. "Before this charade of misconduct continues, I have a factual update for the council. You are mistaken. Jane is not my distraction, my mistress, or a weapon for Dae-hyun to use." He looked directly at his shocked father, then held Dae-hyun's blazing gaze. "Jane is my wife. We were married in a private ceremony this morning, legally and irrevocably." The resulting silence was a catastrophic implosion of noise. The patriarch dropped his pen. Dae-hyun's jaw went slack, his face draining of all color as his entire, meticulously crafted plan disintegrated before his eyes. Min-seo in the corner looked utterly devastated. "A foreigner? A woman of color? You married her? Today?" Dae-hyun finally sputtered, his voice cracking with outrage. "Yes," Ha-jun confirmed, his eyes hardening with triumph. "You claim my instability is due to a woman unsuitable for the family. I have now made her the most suitable woman by giving her my name, my lineage, and all legal rights to my estate. She is no longer an outsider. She is my spouse and a principal in this family." He looked directly at his father. "If you move to isolate me, you will not be isolating an unstable son. You will be attempting to invalidate a legal marriage and causing a catastrophic PR scandal that will ruin the integrity of the foundation faster than any minor financial misconduct Min-seo ever managed." He then looked at Jane, the fierce possessiveness in his eyes softening into a private, powerful intimacy. He lowered his head and pressed a public, tender kiss to her forehead. "You now have what you want, father," Ha-jun stated, pulling Jane close to his side. "Stability, certainty, and an undisputed claim to the foundation's future. The price was simply accepting my wife. The next item on the agenda is dismissing my malicious stepbrother." The battle had shifted entirely. Ha-jun hadn't just stood up for Jane. He had used the most formal, unassailable contract possible, marriage, to utterly destroy his enemy's plot, cementing the terrifying, non-negotiable nature of his commitment to the woman who melted his obsidian heart. The ride back to the penthouse was starkly different from their chaotic drives before. The tension hadn't vanished. It had condensed into a thick, charged atmosphere of absolute commitment. Jane wore the platinum band like a magnificent shackle, a physical sign of the unbelievable, legally binding risk she had just taken. Ha-jun didn't speak. He simply drove, his expression intense, the controlled violence from the council meeting replaced by a deep, possessive certainty. The moment the penthouse doors closed behind them, Ha-jun shed his elegant facade completely. He tossed his jacket aside and turned to Jane, his eyes burning with the raw hunger that their marriage had only amplified, not satisfied. "Look at your hand," he commanded, his voice a low, gravelly sound. He reached out, lifted her left hand, and watched as the platinum band caught the light. Irrevocable, permanent, mine. He then hauled her against his chest, crushing her body against his. This wasn't a gentle embrace. It was an act of possession, a non-verbal confirmation that the legal vow had only heightened his desperate need for her. "You are my wife," he breathed against her hair, the words a rough, emotional statement of victory and surrender. "You committed yourself to a monster who threatened to kill his brother less than 12 hours ago. You committed yourself to the ruin you saw." Jane wrapped her arms around his waist, meeting his intensity with her own. "I committed myself to the only man who has ever been this honest about his craving. Don't hide from me, Ha-jun. You married me to make me yours. Now we belong together." The fire between them, which had been ignited by their initial magnetic pull and stoked by their arguments and the external threat, exploded into an all-consuming conflagration. Ha-jun kissed her fiercely, his mouth demanding and dominant, erasing any doubt that this marriage was anything less than total possession. Everything about their love was charged with the high stakes of their impulsive vow. They were no longer stealing moments. They were paying the price of their devotion in raw, consuming passion. Their first night as husband and wife was a conversation of surrender and ferocity. Ha-jun was intense, relentless, and utterly focused on Jane, a reflection of the absolute precision he brought to every aspect of his life, now turned entirely onto his wife. He needed to feel the vibrant warmth of her life, the powerful, undeniable energy of the woman who had shattered his decade-old walls. Jane met his intensity with defiant and unbridled, showing him that she accepted the magnificent monster, the dangerous possessiveness, and the profound vulnerability he had just exposed. She drove him past the clinical control he valued, forcing him into a primal, desperate vulnerability that was utterly new. One beautiful night, Ha-jun lay tangled with her, his breathing heavy, his face buried against the fragrant curve of her neck. He felt exposed, stripped bare, and completely, irrevocably claimed by the warmth of her presence. "When I was a boy," he confessed, his voice muffled, his words barely audible, "I was taught that love was an asset to be managed, a contract to be enforced. Minseo proved that contract was worthless." He lifted his head, his eyes dark with the remnants of desire and fear. "With you, Jane, I do not feel like a CEO or a surgeon. I feel owned, and I realize that is the only way I could ever trust again." He looked at the ring on her hand, then back at her face. "You saved me from my cold prison, and I will spend the rest of our lives making sure no one, especially not my family, ever tries to take that warmth from me." He pressed a final, deep kiss to her lips, a vow that sealed the marriage far more effectively than any civil paper. The price had been paid in fire, and the new, intense chapter of their life as husband and wife had just begun. The shocking news of Ha-jun's lightning-fast marriage to the foreign woman, Jane, hit the Seoul elite like a seismic wave. Within hours, the narrative Dae-hyun had been planning to spin of Ha-jun's emotional instability and unsuitable distraction had been utterly ruined by the irreversible fact of a marriage certificate. In a secure, soundproofed room in a downtown investment firm, Dae-hyun and Min-seo met. The usual politeness and veiled hostility were gone, replaced by a cold, unifying rage. "You failed, Dae-hyun," Min-seo hissed, swirling the expensive whiskey in her glass. "You underestimated his desperation. He didn't cut her loose. He made her permanent. My shame is now a public spectacle of his triumph." Dae-hyun slammed his fist on the table. "I underestimated the power of his animal possessiveness. He nearly shot me. He is insane. But the game is not over, Min-seo. He married her for a legal shield. We will expose that shield as fragile and fake." "How?" "Ha-jun is the face of the foundation, the ethical, brilliant surgeon. Jane is his weakness. We attack his reputation, we attack her credibility, and we make the marriage so politically and financially costly that he is forced to choose between the woman he craves and the empire he protects," Dae-hyun explained, his eyes glittering with cold strategy. "You know his vulnerabilities in the foundation structure. I know the press." Min-seo smiled, a cruel, elegant curve of the lips. "He protected his wealth by marrying her. We will make his wealth indefensible because of her." The attack begins. By noon, the articles began to drop. Not just scandalous gossip, but meticulously placed, damaging leaks. A prestigious financial paper ran an anonymous piece questioning Ha-jun's recent erratic behavior, suggesting stress had affected his judgment in clinical decisions. A major gossip outlet published photos of Jane's past, notably photos of her working as an artist model in L.A., framing it as low-class scandalous employment unsuitable for the spouse of an elite foundation CEO. Min-seo, leveraging her past contacts, planted doubt among key foundation board members, suggesting Jane was an agent hired by a rival firm to destabilize Ha-jun and secure a massive divorce settlement. Back in the penthouse, the domestic calm of their impulsive marriage was instantly shattered by the digital storm. Ha-jun, dressed in a silk robe, read the articles on his tablet, his face hardening with professional fury. "They're not attacking me through the law. They're attacking my professional integrity," Ha-jun stated, his voice dangerously low. "The rumor about the clinical judgment is serious. They are trying to invalidate my right to lead the foundation." Jane, wearing one of Ha-jun's oversized shirts, stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. The sting of the personal attacks, the racist undertones about her background, and the classist assumptions about her employment was sharp, but her resolve was sharper. "They're attacking me because they know I'm your weakest link," Jane noted, her fingers tracing the tense line of his shoulders. "The low-class foreign art model who trapped the rich doctor. They want you to feel shame, Ha-jun. They want you to retreat and protect your reputation." Ha-jun turned, pulling her to face him, his hands resting possessively on her shoulders. "And I will not. But this is no longer a private fight, Jane. This is a war for control of the foundation, and you are officially the face of my defense. You are the CEO's wife. What do you need me to do?" "I need you to show them that you are not a cheap distraction. You are smart, resilient, and utterly non-negotiable. I need you to master the language of this game. We are going to counter every single one of their narratives." Ha-jun grabbed his phone and began issuing rapid, ruthless commands to his staff. Lawsuits against the tabloids, emergency meetings with the board, and a public statement addressing the rumors. Then, he stopped and looked at Jane with a calculating gleam in his eye. "First, we are going to teach Min-seo and Dae-hyun the cost of attacking my wife's credibility." He handed Jane his tablet. "I need you to study the foundation's portfolio. I need you to know the weaknesses of Dae-hyun's recent investment strategy, the one he boasted about at the gala." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a seductive, yet utterly focused intimacy. "I need you to be my corporate weapon. Jane, and I need you to be utterly convincing." He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that was less about passion and more about stealing their resolve, a communion of war. "You married a monster," Hajun reminded her, the heat in his eyes a dangerous promise. "Now you must become a queen." Hajun pushed Jane relentlessly. For 2 days, the penthouse became a command center. While Hajun managed the external legal fallout, Jane immersed herself in the foundation's financial data, focusing specifically on the high-risk, high-exposure investments Daehyun had championed. Hajun taught her the nuanced terminology, the underlying vulnerabilities, and the specific market movements that were already causing silent instability in Daehyun's portfolio. Jane, with her sharp mind and intense focus, absorbed it all. She realized Daehyun hadn't just made bad investments. He had made arrogant investments, betting on instability that hadn't materialized, leaving the foundation exposed. "You are ready," Hajun stated late that night, watching Jane flawlessly articulate the weakness of the global energy futures strategy. He looked at her, not as a lover, but as a general looking at his most precise weapon. "Tomorrow is the Foundation's quarterly internal summit. Daehyun will be presenting. You will attend with me." The next morning, Jane walked into the executive conference room on Hajun's arm. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored Korean-style suit, a nod to her new status, yet styled with her own undeniable confidence. The room was a landscape of powerful, skeptical faces, the conservative board members, the patriarch, and, sitting rigidly opposite Hajun, Daehyun, who smirked thinly, assuming Jane was merely window dressing. Minseo was not present, but her influence, the whisper of unstable judgment, hung in the air. Daehyun began his presentation on his key investment strategy, detailing the projected returns from the global energy futures. He spoke with slick, practiced confidence, deliberately excluding technical jargon that would confuse non-finance members. Hajun sat silent, his arm draped possessively over the back of Jane's chair, his expression neutral. He waited for Jane's cue. Daehyun concluded with a triumphant flourish. "And thus, gentlemen, the Foundation is poised for a massive 20% return on this strategic, high-growth investment." A beat of silence followed. Then Jane spoke. Her voice was clear, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion, delivered in precise Korean that Hajun had drilled her on. "Dr. Daehyun, if I may," Jane began, rising slightly in her seat, holding a single annotated page. "I have a question regarding the hedging structure for the global energy futures portfolio." Daehyun's smirk vanished. He was momentarily stunned that the art model was speaking. "Mrs. Hajun, while your interest is noted, this is a technical discussion." "It is, indeed," Jane interrupted smoothly, meeting his gaze. "Your presentation relies on a static view of the current political environment. But if we analyze the sovereign risk correlation curve, as outlined by the third quarter Fitch report, which I notice is missing from your appendix, the probability of default in the supplier regions exceeds your projected hedge costs by nearly $8 million. Jane didn't pause, delivering the fatal flaw with surgical precision. "You calculated the hedge based on the spot market rather than the forward volatility over the next 18 months. That $8 million exposure, Dr. Daehyun, means your projected 20% return is mathematically impossible. It currently sits at closer to 7.5%, assuming the political environment remains stable, which is a significant gamble." The room erupted in whispers. Jane hadn't challenged his personality, she had challenged his competence, the one currency Daehyun truly valued. The board members, many of whom were conservative and meticulous, immediately reached for their copies of the report. Daehyun was sweating. He stammered, "That is an overly pessimistic calculation, Mrs. Hajun. That information is proprietary, and not relevant to the general board summary. Ha-jun finally leaned forward, his voice cold and commanding. It is entirely relevant, Dae-hyun. My wife merely articulated the core flaw in your strategy. You were reckless. She identified a critical $8 million exposure that you either missed or deliberately obscured. He looked at his father, his eyes steely. Jane is here not as an ornament, but as a second pair of eyes. She is guarding the Foundation's interests where others have proven careless. Jane had successfully executed the perfect counterattack. She hadn't fought with emotion. She had fought with data and intellect, proving to the entire Conservative Council that Ha-jun's impulsive wife was, in fact, a crucial asset. The patriarch, always focused on profit and stability, looked at Jane with a grudging, calculating respect. He then turned his hard gaze on Dae-hyun. Explain this discrepancy, Dae-hyun. Immediately. Dae-hyun was utterly defeated, his face a mask of impotent rage directed entirely at Jane. The scornful title of unsuitable foreigner had been instantly replaced with the far more dangerous title of threat. Ha-jun rose, placing his hand firmly on Jane's shoulder. We have provided the necessary oversight. The Foundation's future is secure, he stated, looking around the room at the now receptive board. Come, Jane. We have a marriage to celebrate. He led her out. The victory tasted sweeter than any surgical success. He paused in the empty corridor, turning her to him, his expression one of profound possessiveness and pride. You were magnificent, he murmured, cupping her face and kissing her. A brief, hard, possessive reward. You just saved my professional reputation and sealed your own legitimacy. Now, we go home and prepare for the next battle. Dae-hyun will not let this go. Jane's corporate victory had been a swift, surgical strike, securing her position within the Foundation. But Min-seo and Dae-hyun, reeling from the public humiliation, immediately pivoted to a lower, more malicious form of warfare. They weren't targeting the stock market. They were targeting Jane's soul. That evening, as Jane and Ha-jun reviewed the final damage to Dae-hyun's portfolio, Jane's phone pinged with a notification. A direct message on a rarely used social media account from an anonymous user. The message contained two things: a grainy photograph of Jane from several years ago in a setting that looked distinctly less glamorous than Seoul, and a short, venomous text written in Korean. The doctor's wife has a past darker than her complexion. Ask her about the fire. Jane's face paled, the blood draining from her lips. She didn't flinch during the boardroom confrontation, but this attack reached into a buried, painful chapter of her life. Ha-jun, sensing the profound shift in her demeanor, took the phone gently from her hand. He looked at the photo, then read the cruel message, his eyes immediately hardening into chips of ice. What is this, Jane? He asked, his voice low, devoid of judgment but heavy with concern. It's my past. From L.A., Jane finally admitted, her voice trembling. Before I came here. It's a very small, very dark story, something I moved on from. Ha-jun locked the phone and immediately began issuing commands into his personal communicator, his tone switching to a focused, lethal calm. Find the source of this account, find the original distributor of this image, and prepare a dossier on anything and everything related to Jane Doe from L.A., focusing on the last 7 years. He turned back to Jane, pulling her close, his arms a fierce, protective cage. They will try to use this to humiliate you, to make you vulnerable. They will leak it to the press and claim it proves you are damaged, unstable, and unworthy. Tell me everything, now. I cannot fight ghosts I don't understand. Jane took a deep breath, resting her head against his chest. She confessed to him the shame she had carried, a difficult period involving a manipulative, older man, an artist, who had tried to control her. The fire was a small, accidental incident involving her studio and a volatile argument, an incident she had been cleared of, but that had been devastatingly messy and public in the small artistic circles she ran in. "I left L.A. to escape the memory of that mess, Hajun," she finished, her voice thick with residual pain. "It's not just scandalous. It's the weakness I never wanted you to see." Hajun lifted her face, his gaze intense. "Weakness? You survived. You rebuilt your life and came to a new country. That is strength." He kissed her forehead, a slow, possessive, and entirely non-negotiable affirmation of her worth. "Dae-hyun and Min-seo are banking on my judgment being clouded by this supposed scandal," Hajun stated, his eyes blazing with protective fury. "They believe I will be ashamed of your history. They believe I will pay them to make it disappear." The next morning, the smear campaign began. A tabloid published a cryptic article hinting at the dark, troubled past of the foreign princess bride, complete with veiled references to police reports and unstable behavior. The attack was designed to create doubt and social isolation. Hajun didn't flinch. He walked into his command center, now staffed by a team of highly paid, silent security and intelligence specialists. "Operation Clean Slate," Hajun announced, his voice carrying the authority of endless wealth. "We are buying the past. Every single police report, every deposition, every tabloid article, and every digital record relating to Jane Doe from the last 7 years is to be acquired, neutralized, and scrubbed. I want every source of the rumor identified, and a non-disclosure agreement with a crippling financial penalty established for anyone who ever speaks of it again." He looked at his chief security officer. "Find the person who sent that message. They will be dealt with legally and financially. Make sure Dae-hyun and Min-seo know that for every rumor they start, I will spend 10 times the value of their entire net worth to bury it." Hajun knew this wasn't about integrity. It was about absolute power. He was willing to use his overwhelming wealth as a weapon to destroy the shadows threatening his wife. Later that day, Ha-jun stepped away from the corporate chaos and found Jane in the penthouse library. He walked over to her, his movements radiating the powerful security of a man who could actually buy silence. He reached out, cupped her cheek, and looked at her with pure, unadulterated devotion. "Your past is no longer theirs to control, my wife," he stated, his voice a possessive murmur. "It is ours, and I have just bought it for you. You are clean, Jane. Free. The price was steep, but my ability to protect you is infinite." He kissed her, a deep, tender kiss that confirmed that the only darkness he recognized was the fear of losing her, a fear he was now fighting with all his colossal wealth and power. The Operation Clean Slate was a success. Ha-jun's team worked with terrifying speed, neutralizing every rumor about Jane's past. Dae-hyun and Min-seo's last strategic attack had not just failed, it had cost them substantial hidden funds, which Ha-jun's team tracked and exposed, revealing their coordinated malice to the Foundation's legal counsel. Dae-hyun, cornered and humiliated, was financially bleeding and politically isolated. His father, the patriarch, was leaning heavily toward disinheritance, swayed by Jane's corporate utility and Ha-jun's extreme display of commitment. Min-seo, seeing the imminent fall, vanished, protecting her own remnants of wealth and leaving Dae-hyun entirely alone, consumed by blinding, impotent rage directed solely at the woman who had ruined him. 2 days later, Ha-jun had a late-night Foundation meeting. He was reluctant to leave Jane, but the final legal maneuver against Dae-hyun required his signature. "I won't be long," he promised, standing in their penthouse living room. "The final papers are being prepared. By morning, Dae-hyun will be formally excised from the Foundation and barred from the family estate." "Be careful," Jane warned, walking him to the door. Her victory was tainted by the knowledge of how desperate and dangerous Dae-hyun had become. "I am always careful," Ha-jun replied, his eyes dark with possessive certainty. He pulled her into a hard, lingering kiss. The only threat is gone. I will return to you. But Dae-hyun hadn't left the game. He had simply changed the rules to violence. He had managed to bypass the penthouse security by ambushing a catering assistant in the service elevator, wearing the uniform and a mask of furious desperation. Jane was reading in the quiet library when the door to the living room burst open, sending a framed photograph scattering across the marble floor. Dae-hyun stood there, no longer the smooth, arrogant stepbrother, but a ghost of malice. He was sweating, his eyes wild, and in his hand, he held a wickedly sharp letter opener taken from Hajun's own desk. You, he spat, his voice shaking with venomous hatred. You took everything, the foundation, the respect, my future, and you did it with lies and a whore's charm. Jane stood slowly, her heart hammering, but her voice remained steady. Dae-hyun, this is over. Hajun has won. Don't make this worse. It's only over when I cut the prize from him. Dae-hyun lunged, not aiming to kill, but to seize her, to inflict a devastating, humiliating wound. Jane sidestepped the desperate grab, knocking a vase onto the floor. The crash echoed through the silent penthouse. Dae-hyun caught her, his arm tightening around her throat in a chokehold, dragging her backward toward the expansive, unguarded panoramic windows overlooking the 30-story drop. I will show him what happens when he chooses a gutter rat over his family, he screamed. He can watch you fall. Ha-jun was signing the final legal paperwork when his private security officer's phone buzzed with an alert, a code violation in the penthouse service area. The security officer tried to speak, but Ha-jun had already read the look of terror in the guard's eyes. Ha-jun grabbed his coat and ran, not waiting for the elevator. He took the emergency stairwell 3 steps at a time, his mind cycling only on the chilling image of Dae-hyun's face. He burst into the penthouse living room to the sound of breaking glass and found Jane struggling in Dae-hyun's grasp near the massive window, the letter opener glinting near her throat. The controlled fury that Jane had seen before was gone. This was pure, unadulterated, primal devastation. Dae-hyun was threatening the only thing that gave Ha-jun's life meaning, and the cold doctor vanished entirely. Ha-jun didn't call the police. He didn't reason. He didn't even yell. He moved with savage speed, crossing the room in 3 strides and launching himself at Dae-hyun with a bestial cry of rage. He didn't pull Dae-hyun off. He drove him off, slamming his body into the stepbrother with the full force of his desperate terror. Dae-hyun hit the ground hard, the letter opener skittering across the marble. Ha-jun landed on top of him, hands clamped around Dae-hyun's throat, his eyes wide and vacant with murderous intent. I warned you, Ha-jun choked out, his voice a whisper of pure, visceral hatred. I told you I would kill you if you touched her. I told you. Jane scrambled up, terrified, seeing the actual lethal intent in her husband's eyes. Ha-jun was crushing the life out of his brother, oblivious to everything else. Ha-jun, stop! He's not worth it, Jane cried, throwing herself onto her husband's back, pulling with all her strength. He's defeated. Don't ruin us for him. Her voice, the voice of the woman he had married, the woman he had fought the world for, finally pierced the blinding red curtain of his rage. His hands unlocked from Dae-hyun's throat, shaking violently. He scrambled off the gasping, beaten stepbrother and staggered back, turning instantly to Jane. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his powerful frame shaking uncontrollably. You're safe. You're safe, he repeated into her hair, the words a raw, broken litany. Dae-hyun lay gasping on the floor, the remnants of his malice gone, replaced by the realization that his brother, the cold doctor, had indeed been willing to commit murder for his wife. The security team finally poured into the penthouse. Ha-jun, still holding Jane, spoke, his voice absolute. Secure him. Call the police and the Foundation legal team. He is to be charged with home invasion and attempted assault. He will never step foot on my property or near my wife again. He looked down at Jane, his wife, his anchor, the only person who had the power to both destroy and save him. The price, he whispered, his lips trembling against her hair, is finally paid. Dae-hyun was exiled, legally separated from the Foundation, his public reputation shattered by the revealed conspiracy. Min-seo was neutralized, her influence and assets frozen by the combined weight of Ha-jun's power. Ha-jun didn't return to the hospital immediately. He spent the next month solidifying his victory, but more importantly, solidifying his marriage. The possessive fire between him and Jane deepened, tempered by the shared trauma and the absolute undeniable commitment to one another. He never apologized for the gun or the chokehold. Instead, he simply showed her the depth of his devotion in every quiet gesture, the constant security detail, the public tenderness, and the fierce, passionate intimacy they shared every night in the home she had saved. Jane, now fully integrated into the Ha-jun empire, proved to be an indispensable strategic and emotional partner. She understood the monster, and she loved the man. One evening, months later, Jane was looking out over the city from their penthouse window, the platinum band gleaming on her finger. Ha-jun came up behind her, wrapping his arms possessively around her waist. "The Foundation is stable," he murmured against her neck. "The rumors are gone. The family has accepted you. Everything is exactly as I planned." Jane smiled, leaning back into his powerful embrace. "You didn't plan for love, Ha-jun. You planned for control. But the love came anyway." "It did," he admitted, turning her to face him, his eyes softening into the dangerous warmth she had first seen when she fainted. "It came like a fever. And now, my wife, I am never letting go." He kissed her, a deep, satisfied kiss that confirmed the victory was not just corporate or legal, but deeply, possessively intimate. The cold doctor had been irrevocably transformed into a husband whose love was a magnificent, terrifying, and absolutely non-negotiable fire. The end.